What happens when humanity stops believing that the universe has a grand plan? What happens when religion begins to lose its authority, when war destroys the illusion of progress, and when people suddenly realize that existence doesn't come with instruction? These type of questions created existentialism, not as a trend, not as an aesthetic, but as a crisis. Existentialism is often associated with black turtlenecks, cigarette smokes, cafes in Paris, and people saying life is meaningless. But existentialism is not really about the despair. It's about what happens after that despair. It asks us, if life has no predetermined meaning, then who is the one to create the meaning? And literature becomes a perfect way to explore that question, because through novels, plays, and poetry, something that philosophy could not achieve is that it makes the reader feel the alienation, the anxiety, the freedom, the guilt, the absurdity, and the terrifying burden of choice. Today, we are tracing the complete history of existentialism, from ancient philosophy to 19th century rebellion, through the world wars, through philosophers like Soren, Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, to writers like Fyodor Dostoevsky, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Albert Camus. And more importantly, we are going to explore how existentialism transformed literature forever. Before understanding the history of existentialism, we need to figure out what existentialism actually is. Existentialism is a less of a strict philosophy and more of a way of confronting the existence. At its core, it believes that humans are thrown into existence without inherent meaning. Life does not come with universal instruction, and individuals are responsible for creating the meaning through their choices and action. And that freedom, though it sounds beautiful, but the existentialists believe that freedom was terrifying, because if there's no predetermined destiny, then every decision becomes your own responsibility. And this created the existential anxiety, the anxiety of choosing, the anxiety of existing, the anxiety of realizing that no external system can fully save you from uncertainty. Existentialist thinkers focused on themes like alienation, absurdity, freedom, death, identity, authenticity, isolation, and moral responsibility. And literature became the natural home for these themes because stories could dramatize the internal crisis way better than philosophy textbooks could. Existentialism is not simply about life is meaningless. It is life has no inherent meaning. Therefore, you are the one to create one. And that distinction changes everything. Even though existentialism became famous in the 20th century, its roots go much deeper. Some scholars would even trace existential concerns all the way back to ancient philosophers. Think about Socrates. His famous statement, the unexamined life is not worth living. The idea that individuals must confront their own existence consciously became foundation to existential thought. Later thinkers like Saint Augustine explored internal conflict, guilt, and selfhood. But existentialism truly began to take place and take shape in the 19th century. And this happened because Europe itself was changing dramatically. The Industrial Revolution transformed society. Scientific discoveries challenged all the religious certainty. Urbanization isolated people from traditional communities. And slowly, human beings began facing a terrifying possibility. What if modernity had destroyed everything that people believed in without replacing them? And this anxiety created a perfect condition for existential philosophy. One of the first major existential thinker was Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard lived in the 19th century Denmark and reacted strongly against organized religion and philosophical system. At that time, philosophers like George William Friedrich Hegel believed that reality could be explained through rational system, and Kierkegaard rejected this idea completely. He believed that the truth is subjective, not subjective in the sense of facts, but subjective, that human existence cannot be reduced down to abstract theories. You can explain love philosophically, but the explanation is not the same as experiencing it. You can explain the faith logically, but faith requires this uncertainty. Kierkegaard focused intensely on individual experience. He explored dread, anxiety, despair, faith, and choice. One of the most important concepts that he coined was the leap of faith. For him, human beings cannot achieve absolute certainty. At some point, we must leap into the belief despite the uncertainty. And this idea influenced existential literature because existential characters constantly choose without guarantee. Kierkegaard also explored the idea of despair, not in a form of a dramatic sadness, but the despair of living inauthentically, the despair of becoming disconnected from your true self. The psychological focus later became the central fact of modern fiction. If Kierkegaard introduced the existential anxiety, Friedrich Nietzsche turned it into a cultural earthquake. Nietzsche was one of the most misunderstood philosophers, according to me. People always reduce him down to pessimism or nihilism. But Nietzsche was diagnosing the crisis. His famous statement, God is dead, did not mean that a literal deity is physically dead. It means that modern society no longer believed in the moral and religious structure that once gave life its meaning. Science, rationalism, modernity had weakened the traditional belief system, but Nietzsche warned us that if old values collapse, humanity risks into falling into nihilism, the belief that nothing matters. So Nietzsche asked, how do humans create meaning after the collapse of certainty? His answer was radical. Humans have to create value for themselves. This led to concepts like the overcoming and the will to power. Nietzsche admired individuals who created meaning artistically and courageously rather than being blindly following the societal tradition. And this transformed literature because suddenly literature became interested in fragmented identities, moral ambiguity, psychological conflict, rebellion against the social norms. And we can already see the traces of existentialism entering modern fiction over here. Characters stopped being simple moral heroes believing in the good. Instead, they became conflicted individuals struggling to define themselves. Before existentialism became an official philosophical movement, literature was already exploring this existential crisis. And no writer is more important in this, according to me, than Fyodor Dostoevsky. Many people consider Dostoevsky as one of the first existential novelists. His work explored guilt, freedom, morality, suffering, alienation, and psychological instability long before existentialism became fashionable. In Notes from the Underground, the narrator is bitter, contradictory, isolated, and painfully self aware. He rejects all rational systems, sabotages himself deliberately. And why? Because Dostoevsky feared that modern societies were reducing human into machines that were governed entirely by logic. The underground man insists that humans are irrational, that they desire freedom even if it destroys them. And this became a major existential idea. Humans are not stable, rational beings. They are conflicted creatures capable of contradiction. And then came Crime and Punishment. Raskolnikov commits a murder believing that he is intellectually superior to morality. But the novel shows that the idea alone cannot erase the guilt. Existential literature became deeply interested in what happens when psychologically after moral transgression. Dostoevsky's influence on the 20th century existentialism is enormous. Both Sartre and Camus admired him deeply. Existentialism exploded into popularity after the World War II. And honestly, it makes a lot of sense. Europe has witnessed industrialized death on a horrifying scale. Millions died, entire cities were destroyed, and the belief that humanity is progressing towards a rational and civilized society suddenly became absurd. People started questioning morality, religion, politics, and the human nature itself. How could meaning survive after such destruction? This historical trauma shaped existentialism profoundly. Existentialism became a philosophy of a generation that was facing a shattered certainty, and literature responded immediately. Writers stopped portraying neat moral universes. Instead, modern literature became fragmented, anxious, and psychologically intense. Alienated protagonists became common. Characters wandered through meaningless system, and identity itself became unstable. And this is why 20th century literature feels completely different from earlier literature. Modernism and existentialism had become deeply interconnected by now. Then came Jean-Paul Sartre, the man who made existentialism globally famous. Sartre argued that existence precedes the essence, and this became one of the defining statements of existentialism. And what does it mean? That a knife is created with a purpose, but the essence of that knife came before its existence. But us humans are different. We exist first, and then afterward, we define ourselves through our actions. According to Sartre, you're not born with a fixed meaning. You become who you are through your choices, and because of this, humans are condemned to be free. And this phrase sounds strange, but Sartre meant that we cannot escape the responsibility for our actions. Even refusing to choose is a choice in itself. And this freedom creates anguish because humans are constantly looking for excuses: society, destiny, religion, family, fate. But existentialism removes all of these protections. Sartre explored these ideas both through philosophy and through literature. His novel Nausea portrays a man overwhelmed by the sheer existence of reality itself. His plays trapped characters in psychological and moral conflict. Existentialism entered the theater powerfully through Sartre, and this eventually influenced absurdist dramas later on. Alongside Sartre was Albert Camus. Though Camus himself rejected an existential label, he became focused on the absurd. Absurd emerges from the conflict between humanity's desire for meaning and the universe's silence towards it. Humans desperately seek the answer, but the universe isn't giving us any. And this has created absurdity. Camus explored this brilliantly in The Stranger. The protagonist feels emotionally detached from society's expectations. He is indifferent from the shocks of the world around it, be it the death of his mother or physical violence. But Camus is not arguing for hopelessness. In the myth of Sisyphus, he famously imagines Sisyphus as a man eternally pushing a rock uphill as happy. Why? Because the meaning is created through rebellion itself. Through continually despising the absurdity, Camus believed that humans must live fully even when we don't have the ultimate answers. And this idea transformed existential literature into something strangely beautiful. How did exactly existentialism change literature? And I think it changed it completely. Existential literature shifted the focus from external adventure to internal crisis. The battlefield became the human mind. Common existential literary themes included alienation, isolation, absurdity, freedom, identity crisis, moral ambiguity, anxiety, death, and meaninglessness. Existential literature always often focus on protagonists who are outsiders, anti-heroes, emotionally detached, or individuals struggling against society. And existentialism has heavily influenced modernism, absurdist theater, postmodern literature, and psychological fiction. Writers influenced by this existential theory it includes Franz Kafka, Samuel Beckett, Virginia Woolf, T.S. Eliot, Hermann Hesse, and in the trial by Franz Kafka, bureaucracy becomes a nightmarishly meaningless. In Waiting for Godot, characters wait endlessly for someone who is never going to arrive. Existentialism is not only changed the themes of literature, but literature, the form of literature has also been changed by it. Fragmenting narratives, stream of consciousness, silence, ambiguity, and unreliable narrators all became tools to explain this existential uncertainty. Existentialism emerged during moments when humanity has lost its uncertainty, and maybe that is why it continues to resonate with us right now. Because modern lives still feel uncertain. People struggle with identity, loneliness, freedom, and purpose. Existentialism never promised us a comfort. It never claimed that the universe will start to explain itself eventually. Instead, it offered us something a bit more difficult. It offered us responsibility. The responsibility to create meaning despite the uncertainties. And literature became a perfect means to explore that struggle. Because stories allow us to witness human confronting existence itself, not as an abstract theory, but as a lived in reality. And maybe that's why existential literature feels so personal, because somewhere inside we start to recognize ourselves within the characters. If you have enjoyed this video, please subscribe to Novel Nooks for more videos on literature, philosophy, and the strange emotional words hidden inside books. And if you feel like I have missed anything, let me know in the comments down below.